Good morning, folks. This is John Schreiber. Thank you so much for participating this morning. I welcome you from the 23rd floor of One Theater Square across the street from NJPAC. We are still here. The building is ready to go. When it will go is anybody's guess, but maybe a few things we'll learn today will enlighten us about what the future will hold. Thank you for taking time. These business partner roundtable events are ones we love to do, and interestingly, now that they are virtual, our attendance has grown exponentially, and I guess probably one of the only benefits of what we're going through is that we all are able to spend time like this that we didn't have before, I guess. We hope that each of you is healthy and that you're staying safe and staying home, as all of us at NJPAC are. Today we have two remarkable leaders from our state's healthcare and pharmaceutical industries joining us to discuss how their organizations are fighting the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We offer thanks to our series sponsor, PNC Bank, for sponsoring these programs, and to our Thoughtful Business Partners Committee Chair, Joel Sherman of Atlantic Tomorrow's office. So just to remind you of the timing, this is a 45-minute session, a half-hour moderated Q&A with our panelists and me, followed by 15 minutes of questions from you. If you would like to ask our panelists a question, you can do so at any time by typing it into the Q&A box. We'll ask the questions we receive from you at the end of our conversation, and you can find the Q&A box when you hover your cursor at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So let me introduce our panelists. Barry Ostrowsky is the president and CEO of RWJBarnabas Health, a comprehensive academic health system that includes 11 acute care hospitals, 3 children's hospitals, a pediatric rehabilitation hospital, and a freestanding behavioral health center. Barry is spearheading a system-wide endeavor to promote healthier living for employees and members of the RWJBarnabas' diverse communities and develop effective strategies to address their social needs. The system's private-public partnership with Rutgers includes the Rutgers Cancer Institute, the Rutgers Health and Rutgers Education, Research, and Clinical Activities. This partnership creates a multi-specialty group of more than 2,500 practitioners, one of the largest medical groups in the country. And I am really so proud that in addition to his many responsibilities at RWJBarnabas, he also serves as a co-chair of the Art Center's Board of Directors. Thanks, Barry. Also with us today is Carmen Villar, who is the Vice President of Social Business Innovation at Merck. Carmen joined Merck after a distinguished career at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, culminating in her role as Chief of Staff at the CDC. In her current role at Merck, Carmen works across the company to elevate the intersection of corporate responsibility and business impact while striving to create sustainable health systems to support improved health and well-being globally. During her 7-year tenure as the CDC's Chief of Staff, Carmen helped lead the agency through both the West African Ebola emergency response in 2014 and the Zika emergency response in 2016. Carmen also worked in both Nigeria and Zambia, providing leadership and oversight to CDC's programs as part of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And again, I'm so delighted that she is also a member of the Art Center's board. Thanks, Carmen. So to begin, I'd like to ask each of you to make a kind of an opening statement of sorts. I'll start with Barry. Barry, if you would level set with us and talk to us about the state of the pandemic from the perspective of the leader of a major multi-hospital healthcare system. Where is New Jersey right now?
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate this opportunity, and I certainly will be responsive to your question, John, but I can't start any answer without first complimenting our frontline individuals, those who give care to our patients and those who support them directly. They've been nothing less than heroic, and frankly, I'm able to give this report this morning because of their incredible efforts. As you know, New Jersey has been among the hardest hit territories in the world when it's come to COVID-19. And so what began in northern Jersey is now moving southward throughout our state. We are now beginning, and I'm able to report somewhat happily, we're beginning to see the demand on our inpatient capacity dwindle. For the 16th straight day, our system has experienced fewer inpatients with COVID-19, and therefore our capacity to treat others continues to expand. Now, we're not out of the woods, of course, because the people who are in our hospitals are particularly and acutely sick and require the highest levels of intensive care. But we are, in fact, seeing that demand go down. I think that the community at large still has, of course, a great deal of infection and the capacity to spread it, which is very likely to lead to at least a second, if not third wave, sometime over the next 12 months. But for the moment, we in North Jersey, a little less so in Central Jersey, and South Jersey is now starting to deal with the epidemic more directly. We're starting to see some better results in terms of the demand on our facilities.
Thanks. Carmen, can you talk to us about your impressions of the federal response to the pandemic? You were a leader at the CDC. We listen every day and we learn every day from public health experts and to an extent from the executive branch. What's your reaction to the federal response?
Sure, and thanks for having me this morning. It's great to be with you and Barry and the group out there in the virtual world. I think, and I want to echo what Barry said, you know, we have some folks at Merck who are volunteering, who are trained healthcare professionals who have either gotten recertified or have gone into active service on the front lines. And what they're seeing is amazing, but they couldn't jump into some of these systems like, you know, RWJBarnabas without jumping into really solid, well-trained groups of folks and really hitting the ground running. So I just really want to thank all of our frontline healthcare providers for that as well. Just to say that, you know, I think there are three things that are really critical during a response like this coming from our leadership in any administration. And I would say the first thing is to have a leader early and to coordinate an all-of-government response. We saw that in the Ebola response in 2014 when an Ebola coordinator was appointed early on. And this is very important because it's not just about health. What that person at a White House, sitting in a White House seat, can do is also coordinate with other departments like Commerce, like the Interior, with other folks that need to be brought into a full all-of-government response. And I think that that's a very critical piece. And it needs to be somebody who doesn't have, you know, a regular day job in the administration already, because they need to focus 110% on this kind of response to a pandemic like coronavirus. So I would say that first and foremost, the government has now done a little bit more of that. But I think that having an independent person reporting directly to a top White House official is really important to bring in all of government. Second thing I would say is that consistent and clear communication is really important. In times like this, the public is really looking to the government for help, for direction, and to have a clear and consistent, constant communication channel is really critical. And I think that we need to do that with accurate information in a timely way so that people know what to do and can take care of themselves and their families in the right way. So, and then the third thing I'll say is to my colleagues, my former colleagues at CDC, I know they've been hunkered down in the Emergency Operations Center there, and the information that they produce in terms of the public health surveillance data showing where cases are and where it's been spreading is really critical. Without that information, nobody knows where to target or how to be prepared. And so I know they're in the bowels of the building there doing that and working as hard as they possibly can to get the information to those who need to communicate it out and tell the country, you know, how they can best protect themselves. So I know they're still doing that, but I think that looking forward, one of the biggest challenges will be, and I think Barry talked about this as well, what happens with the upcoming flu season and how do we monitor and prepare for that? And I would say that my guess right now is that they're thinking a lot about that at CDC.
Mm-hmm. When you look at the world, and I know you're an internationalist, right? What country has, to the extent that any country can do this in best practice, what's the country that's doing this best, that's reacting and responding best? What are best practices?
Well, it's really hard to say. I mean, I think everybody has learned from one another in terms of how this has cascaded throughout the globe. You know, I will say that the contact tracing and the going door to door that China did in the early days was really important. And I think you're hearing a lot about contact tracing now in the media and being able to understand who's been exposed, where they've been exposed, who they've been in contact with, so that you can get it under control. That's really important. So I think that we learned a lot there. I do think that, you know, in Germany, I'm not sure what the miracle was that they did to keep people healthier there, but I think that the leadership there has been really impeccable. We've seen that as well. And acting early and acting often, basically taking in new information and being able to pivot quickly, I think is what some of these countries have done to adjust their strategy and really take quick action.
Right, thanks. Barry, what do
Yes.
we know? What do we know about the virus now, today, that we didn't know 6 weeks ago when large numbers of New Jerseyans began to fall ill?
You know, John, I'm not sure we know nearly enough about this virus today. We certainly knew originally that it was contagious. Perhaps we didn't know, quite frankly, how contagious it was going to be. We were trying to put it on a spectrum of other similar viruses that keeps moving, unfortunately. So while we've learned how to respond, and we've learned literally every day what a better response is, including changes in patient management from our perspective, we still need to know a lot more about this virus. We need to know how the body reacts. We need to understand even some additional symptoms that we seem to be experiencing when infected. So it is an evolving piece of intelligence, and a lot of very smart people, far better trained than I with respect to this, are concentrating on it. And I think that when this ultimately reaches a more acceptable equilibrium, we will understand the virus to the extent we will be able to control it. We'll be able to have interventions that hopefully can better affect the people who are infected, and then ultimately a vaccine. But I think one of the frustrations during this, and we all share it, is that more questions get raised perhaps than there are answers. Mm-hmm. And in today's world of instant communication, in which we all expect answers immediately and beyond answers, solutions quickly, I think many of us, of course, can't wait for those who are the smartest. The folks in Carmen's industry have truly made our lives so much easier over the years by producing the right medications, by conducting the right research. And we, of course, are looking to them for yet another miracle in addressing this. So I think when people want answers to some of the questions that are legitimate, some of those answers are yet to be determined, and that kind of response is in and of itself somewhat frustrating.
Talk for a minute about how you believe communication around the virus is being handled or managed these days. we get so many different communications from so many different types of leaders, whether they are elected officials, whether they are public health officials. As a citizen, who do we listen to?
Yeah, I think that in of itself is a great question. Carmen highlighted the fact that government really has a responsibility to communicate with the public in a fair and accurate way on a regular basis. And I think there is an attempt to do that at all levels of government. As an organization in healthcare, we put out information to our 35,000 employees and our physicians and our supporters daily, and our management team speaks to one another multiple times a day. But that information which gets shared with the public through various organs frequently doesn't match up with other reported information. And so one of the perhaps disadvantages of having the ability to post anything or publish opinion that looks a lot like fact is that it can be misleading to the public, particularly in something as complicated as this kind of infection. So throughout my career, I'm not a clinician. Throughout my career, I trusted the clinicians. As a patient, as a manager, I trusted what the scientists and what the physicians would tell me about whatever issue was at the time topical. And I think when I listen to reports, I look to see who's making the report, and frankly, do they have the credentials to back up the opinion that they're offering. And I think that's the only way you can do it, is to look to the clinically trained scientists for the answers.
Yeah, I think that's right. Carmen, how is the scientific pursuit of a cure different in the context of a national outbreak like this? Are there shortcuts to developing treatments that might not be implemented, that we're looking at now, that we wouldn't do in less urgent scenarios?
Yeah. Well, I would say as a company like Merck, we have gained a lot of experience in this regard with the development of our vaccine product, Ervebo, against the Ebola virus disease. And that was a situation where a lot of preclinical work and clinical work had been done by the government of Canada and by another small biomedical company in Colorado. And I think that we were in a position during the crisis where we had to deploy clinical trial efforts very quickly. And in order to do that, we had to have collaboration from across governments. In that case, it was many different country governments. And what we're dealing with now on a national scale would obviously be some state governments, but also with other partners. And we had to really move quickly. Now, one of the disadvantages of that is that the consistency of the data is a little bit different across the board because the trials are implemented in a little bit of a different way in every setting. And so when you go in for licensure to the FDA, it might take a little bit longer to get all of that coordinated and into the government forms and systems that they're looking for. But I will say that we have learned from that. And I think setting up some parameters around the studies and the trials going in and working very closely with partners would be really, really critical in anything that we develop now during this crisis. We have to, in terms of shortcuts, this is really tough because everybody wants us to move quickly. But the bottom line is that we're dealing with people and injecting people or having them swallow something. And we have to be really safe and we have to be really responsible in how we execute on this research. So, managing expectations is critical. And I think that going forward, what we're seeing, and Merck has entered into a partnership led by the NIH where multiple scientists, academics, and governments are coming together to look at what the potential portfolio might look like, how they can test and how they can move forward quickly together, which I think is really, really great. But I think we also, on the other hand, have to realize that safety and protection of the client or the patient is of utmost importance. And we don't want to create, test, or manufacture anything that is going to put the patient at more risk. So, you know, these are complex issues, and we're talking and thinking about them every day. And the good thing is that everybody wants to do something. And so we're able to take advantage of the brain power across industry, across government, and really put our heads together as scientists to try to come up with something that could work.
Mm-hmm. Barry, a question on testing. Can you talk about it in terms of, A, do you believe right now that there are enough tests produced, are enough tests available? Will we ever have enough? And then beyond testing for the disease, the other tests that are now essential, antibody testing, contact tracing, you know, that kind of trifecta of testing and reporting. Where are we in that, and what do you think the trajectory is?
Well, John, I'll reverse the order a little bit. Will we ever have enough testing? Of course. If we apply the right amount of resources, we should have the right number of tests available to test as many people as need to be tested. At the moment, are we testing enough? No. We need to be able to do a better job of testing greater populations of people in our communities, because it is essential, and I think Carmen made reference to this, that we know exactly what the depth and breadth numbers are of people who have been infected with the disease. There are multiple kinds of tests, of course, and our partners at Rutgers have done a wonderful job, particularly with the saliva-based tests. Many of the tests for the infection right now require swabs that are candidly uncomfortable. The saliva test is an easier one. You've heard it spoken about, and it's certainly been written about, and that will help scale our ability to test more people. So I think we need more testing. I think we can have more testing if the right number of resources are applied. Obviously, the antibody test is the one that people are talking about with the greatest fervor of hope. I have to tell you, unfortunately, that the scientists, yet again, and particularly recently, the head scientist for the state of New Jersey issued a letter offering some sober analysis that the antibody test is not yet ready for us to make some serious decisions. We really don't know that it's giving us readings where we can say people are immune or people are appropriate for the donation of therapeutic plasma. And so while eventually I think we'll know what an appropriate antibody test reading will be, we don't know that right now. And that's partially because we don't know enough about this particular virus. Carmen made reference to the flu season. You get the flu once, you can get it again. If this virus acts in any way, shape, or form in that kind of mutation cycle, people will be able to get it again. Now, we hope that's not the case, and scientific indications are that it's not. But so I think from the testing quantity, we need more, we can get more. From the testing quality, in terms of both timeliness and the antibody tests, we're not there yet, which makes this all that much more, unfortunately, frustrating for so many of us. But I think we'll get there, and I think we'll do that which has to be done in order to maximize the number of tests and get the best possible results on which to make decisions.
Yeah, if I could just add also,
Sure.
John and Barry, that Barry is exactly right. And I think the more we understand about this virus, the more we can do with the information that we get from this type of testing going forward. So understanding exactly what's going to happen with the immune response, as Barry mentioned, and then how we need to act to control that if, in fact, people can get reinfected. We just don't know right now. And because it is novel, we're learning every day. And this is where the key scientists, like at NIH, like at my company, like at CDC, really need to hunker down and look at these critical scientific questions.
Yeah. Carmen, maybe from a Merck perspective and also possibly from a federal perspective, what is your main concern right now? Is it containment, or is it a vaccine, or is it both?
All of the above, John.
Right.
Listen, from the beginning, Merck's #1 priority has been the safety and well-being of its employees and their families. And that continues to be, our top priority. I think our second top priority has been continuing to make sure that our products, our medicines, and our vaccines can get to the patients and the customers that need them the most, right? And that also includes those that have been enrolled or are in clinical trials, really trying to make sure that they continue to get what they need in those trials. They may not be able to come in for their visits and things like that, but how do we, in a creative way, get them what they need that they started with us? And then the last thing is really from the scientific perspective. And this is where we think, we can really be helpful. And again, I don't know that any one company or one entity is going to be able to do this alone. But I do know that we have been collaborating with other companies and consulting with the government and providing our scientific expertise to try to help move that along much quickly. Listen, if we can get a vaccine, we'll be in great shape. If we can get, like we have now, what seems to be some kind of antiviral medication that can provide 30% efficacy, that's a step in the right direction. I think we're moving there together, and we will soon, hopefully by the end of the year, know more. But because it's going to take a little while, we have to still continue to make sure that we're safe and healthy and we're taking precautions. And this is a long-term game, and I know people are getting frustrated and it's very difficult. But I'd much rather have a long, healthy life than a day at the beach.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You were at CDC for 17 years.
20.
20.
Yeah.
You look so young. Right? In your imagination, could you have imagined the situation we're living through, or did you imagine the situation we're living through now?
Yeah. I think that, after things that happened in our public health history with various swine flu outbreaks and anthrax that we saw happen in the Capitol and things like that, we learned from the military, actually, that exercising these types of scenarios is really critical. And that this type of scenario that we're experiencing now was one of those in which would be kind of like at the extreme end of what could happen. And how do we practice that? And how do we be prepared for that? And we would call them tabletop exercises, much like the military. And we would get various health experts around the table and involved. If this happens, what are we going to do? If that happens, what are we going to do? And that way you can exercise your skills and your thinking about how to approach this kind of crisis. And we did that often. And I have to say, in all honesty, it's not easy to focus on what might happen, right? And plan for what might happen. And I think that this is what's happened over time, is that preparing for what might happen, like a coronavirus, requires time, effort, and money. And those kinds of things, when we have long periods in between crises, people forget that money goes away. Their skills aren't exercised. And so then we find ourselves trying to wrap up again in the current situation, and we're at a huge disadvantage. So yes, the answer is, I think people anticipated that something like this might happen. I think we have recognized the importance of exercising our skills in the public health and the health world to be prepared for something like that. I think that it's very hard to stay focused and keep the resources up to the level that you need to be to ensure that constant commitment of exercise, practice, and being prepared.
Right. Barry, I want to, on behalf of everybody who's tuned in here, we have almost 500 people tuned in, which is great, or 450. Thank the Barnabas folks, all of the healthcare workers who are literally risking their lives every day to save our lives. I can't imagine the bravery and also the anxiety that they have to live with in the current environment. Can you Can you talk about that for a little bit? And I can only assume that so many of the workers who are in the COVID units are carrying the virus and undiagnosed. So what's that like every day?
Well, John, on behalf of all of those workers, I thank you for that gratitude and acknowledgement. I too am in awe of what our frontline workers do, as I said at the beginning of the program. It is amazing because those of us in healthcare tend to assume that frontline caregivers will immediately step up. They, as they say, run towards the fire, and they start doing that which has to be done. We've never anticipated, frankly, on our side, the prolonged nature of this particular crisis and the acuity of the patients that they're facing and the uncertainty about the disease. And so while their trained skills come out literally hourly, what is happening is the emotional toll that it takes on these individuals on the job and at home is really something that's incalculable. And in supporting our frontline workers with everything we hope they need from a personal protection standpoint and other resources, we also have to invest in their behavioral health needs, because you can't do what they've been doing literally 7 days a week for this period of time under the focus of the public. This is something that adds another layer of pressure. And of course, we've had almost 2,000 of our colleagues get sick. Many have come back after the appropriate period of time. We have many of them whose family members have gotten sick, and so that adds pressure. So I think all of us are hopeful that now that the surge, at least in our set of circumstances, has passed, we'll be able to give some relief to our frontline workers so that they'll be able to replenish their emotional reservoirs, their physical reservoirs. But they're also acknowledging that there's going to be continued demand and potentially yet another surge or wave. So I don't know how they do it, to be quite honest with you. And I'm in awe every time I speak to them. But I'll tell you, none of them have shrunk from the responsibility. And that's what makes them unique individuals.
Yeah, it's a remarkable time for bravery, and so many people are stepping up in ways that I imagine they never imagined. Right? They'd have to, whether you're a healthcare worker in a COVID ward or the grocery clerk at Whole Foods, you take your life in your hands, and folks are doing it. So you're right.
And if I may, John, I just want to say one of the things that I think is so terrific is when these frontline workers see the kind of outpouring of support from the community, volunteers and trustees, and we have these auto parades around our facilities. They're amazed that people are acknowledging that which they're doing. Intellectually, we all know it's unbelievable, but they are so appreciative of the support and attention and gratitude. It's wonderful to see, and I'm delighted because they have toiled for years somewhat anonymously, doing some miraculous things. They're now front and center, doing great things and being acknowledged for it. So I thank everybody on this call and people who they know for the way they have supported our frontline workers and our institutions, both in our and every other system in New Jersey. It's just been a terrific outpouring by the public.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to warn everybody because I'm assuming nobody has a train to catch, that we'll run maybe about 5 minutes beyond our 9:45 end time. But here's my last question, and I imagine it's an impossible question to ask, but I can't think of two better people to ask it to. So when might we return to quote unquote normal, and what is your prediction, if you have one, about what the new normal might consist of? I'll start with Carmen, please.
Well, I think there's definitely going to be a new normal, right? And what that looks like, I can't really say, but I do think that we're going to go through phases of returning to that new normal. And we're going to have to test things, and we're going to have to be really responsible as citizens I made a joke earlier alluding to the beach issue, but I think that that's a critical example. If you look at what happened out in California, and then the governor having to come back the next day or during the week and say, hey, I'm going to shut down the beaches because we just weren't as responsible as we should have been as citizens. So I think we want to see that move forward. And I think it will be a phased in approach. I know we're talking and planning at Merck about that a lot right now. And, one of the things we've talked about is, do we have certain days where certain parts of the staff come in, and then maybe a week where it's sort of a different team's turn to be in the office and use the facilities and all of that, take advantage of the IT and everything. Or do we approach it in some other way? I also think a lot of businesses are looking at their space designs and how closely people work together, what kind of situations are happening in manufacturing plants and so forth. So I think there is a lot of work to be done here. And because we don't know the answers, I think it will be phased over time. And I think that we all, as independent citizens, have to be responsible for that behavior and really understand how what we do can possibly affect and have adverse effects on other people.
Okay. Barry?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Carmen said. I would summarize the major point perhaps that she made in my view, which is we're going to have to earn our way to this new next normal. And so if we behave ourselves in accordance with appropriate guidelines, we'll accelerate getting to a more comfortable new normal. In our world, the new normal has to start almost immediately, because for the last 6 to 8 weeks, people have deferred getting care for things other than COVID. Now, we've treated many, many patients with non-COVID conditions, but many have in fact resisted coming in for those kinds of treatments, and frankly, to their peril and ultimate detriment. And so we're beginning within the guidelines that the governor has issued to see patients who have deferred care, which deferral is now beginning to lead to some very serious consequences for each of them. So our getting back to normal in our core business is going to be about treating patients with non-COVID conditions and illness and needs in greater numbers, and that's beginning right now. But I think on a societal basis, as Carmen points out, we can start to see new openings of various aspects of our lives, but if we don't behave ourselves, we're going to be back to where we are right now. And so that level of behavior and compliance with guidelines will ultimately accelerate getting us to this new normal.
Thanks. So now we're going to thank you both for such thoughtful answers. We're going to go now to 15 minutes of questions, and Aisha Irvis, my colleague, will moderate that.
Thank you, John, and good morning to everyone.
Morning.
Our first question comes from Joel Sherman, who is the chairperson of our Business Partners Committee, committee head. For both Carmen and Barry, what do they think of the Bloomberg initiative on regional tracing?
I'll defer to Carmen, who's a public health expert.
You mean on providing support for regional contact tracing? Is that the question?
Right, you're in charge. Yeah. Take over. Yeah.
I think, listen, I think what we've heard about contact tracing is that the number of people needed to execute that critical public health intervention is anywhere from 50,000 to 300,000 people on the front lines. And again, going back to my roots at CDC, this is a classic public health intervention that we have used for ages. I mean, in the early days of when sexually transmitted diseases were called venereal diseases, and people went out knocking door to door, asking about symptoms and contacts and injecting people with penicillin. I mean, we have done this from the age of time. But I do recognize that over time and maintaining that preparedness, commitment with resources, both human and monetary, has been hard for public health. And so any effort or any infusion of resources to help train people and get people out there knocking on doors and understanding where the contacts are is really important. So I recognize that there is a need and that public health departments have really lost a lot of funding over time. So if we can infuse them with some money and some resources and some training, then I think that's a great thing.
I certainly would agree with that. I'm hopeful that you look at contact tracing going back to the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. So it isn't, as Carmen points out, anything new by any means. Of course, we have different technologies now. Now, if you can, and it's a big question to me, if you can meld the technology with the kind of contact tracing that you actually need for it to be beneficial, then it should, in fact, leverage the resources that we're going to apply. But I think if we learn one thing from this, as Carmen has pointed out, is that we have underinvested in public health. And public health never goes away. For all the technology and for all that which we've learned and all of the luxuries we have, public health is the one consistency that we've decided to ignore. And so this is going to continue to happen if that continues to be underinvested. So right now we've got to get through it. I welcome any private resource that can make an investment, as long as the investment is in fact designed to get us the very results that we need from the initiative.
Thanks. Aisha, next question, please.
Next question. This one's for Barry. How will you ensure access to healthcare for non-COVID related illnesses while limiting hospital spread?
Well, it's a wonderful question. And frankly, this is the question that has taken up the bulk of our time over the last, I'd say, 7 to 10 days. As I said earlier, we have been treating non-COVID patients in our facilities, even though the emphasis has been on COVID inpatients. So we have units, we have personnel, we have PPE that has been utilized exclusively for non-COVID patients. We will continue to expand that footprint, provided we're able to staff it with as many discrete staff members to treat only non-COVID patients and to have the resources to do that. We are making those plans right now. And one of the things I do want to emphasize, implied in the question, is our medical transport division has given me data over the last 7 days that is very disturbing. People who have finally called for 911-like transport are being found in such a state in their residences that candidly they don't survive. And this number, the numbers of people who unfortunately have deferred that kind of non-COVID emergency care is sadly unbelievable, with terrible, terrible results. So I understand, I think we all understand, the public rightfully is concerned about our facilities that have been overrun perhaps or dominated by COVID infection. We plan on communicating with the public at large that our facilities do have more than sufficient clean and available facility, personnel, and equipment so that we can treat non-COVID patients. But I do think would not be an unusual consideration by anyone to want to ask about that. And we would welcome those inquiries, because we only guess when we preemptively try to answer a question that hasn't been asked. And so anyone who has concerns about safety and cleanliness, please, if you need care, reach out to your physician, to your healthcare provider, to any system or facility upon which you rely, because deferring much longer, I'm sure, is done at your peril.
Aisha, who did that question come from, please?
Yes, I was just going to mention that question came from Jill Armenti from Biohaven.
Okay, great. Next question, please.
Next question comes from Ronald Darnowski, who is retired from Merck. Some tests for the virus and the antibodies are not very reliable. How do I know the difference and what's the impact? Carmen, would you mind beginning? And then to Barry.
Sure. I mean, I think that Barry talked about this earlier, and then, we talked about the impact a little bit. And part of that is that we don't quite know. And I think this is why the critical scientific minds at places like Merck and RWJ and other places is so critical, that we have to really understand what the immune response to this virus is going to be and what the antibody tests might show us. There has been a mix of reviews in terms of the different tests that have been produced. This is a problem, and I know that companies and government agencies alike are really working hard to try and fix it. I don't know the specific answer to the question, but I do know that people are working hard, and there are a lot of unanswered questions, unfortunately. I don't know if Barry wants to comment.
No, thank you, Carmen. I agree with all that you've said. I think people are anxious for answers from tests that the tests aren't designed to give. And so we have to be realistic. And if you have a prescription for a test and you need to talk to the prescribing healthcare professional about exactly what is that test supposed to tell me and why am I getting it or should I get it, I think we'll all have a better understanding. But I'm afraid at the moment, we're looking for answers that some of these tests just won't provide.
Okay, next question is from Virginia Gaskell of the NJM Insurance Group. Do people who survive a severe infection have stronger immunity than those who had mild symptoms or those who were asymptomatic?
I don't know that we know.
Right? We just don't. I think, personally, I think that is the answer. We don't know. And of course, that is frustrating. But I think everyone will, for the moment, have to accept the fact that we just don't have an answer to that question.
I mean, the human body is such an amazing thing to study. And I will say that, I've mentioned the Ebola outbreak in West Africa a couple times, but we're still learning about what happened in the human body after an exposure and after an illness in Ebola. We learned what happens to the virus. It stays longer in your eyes. There have been men study around what happens to them from a reproductive kind of mode. There have been lots of studies that have been done, and we are still, 5 or 6 years later, we're still learning about what happens to the virus in the body or how your body responds. So I think we will be learning more and more about coronavirus for years to come.
Thank you. Next question is from Dina Lowenbach, who's also part of the NJPAC, is a NJPAC Women's Board, Women at NJPAC trustee, excuse me. How can we ensure that the federal government updates and acts on any possible upcoming health issues so that we don't get caught years behind again?
Do you
Democracy
have
in
an office
action.
in Washington, D.C., Dina? I mean, we talked about being prepared. We talked about exercising. We talked about the lack of infrastructure in the public health system. I will say that over the last few years, there's been an effort called Global Health Security, where people have really tried to push on the basics of public health and preparedness. And I know there have been a lot of efforts in Congress to get these SBA programs out and these loan programs out and so forth. I think that there will be an effort in Washington to look at this issue around global health security and how do we address that. And I would say that anybody interested, in this issue should be an advocate for that on the Hill or in their local district.
Yeah, I think that kind of advocacy is critical, of course. We all speak to our elected officials and there are a set of priorities that we typically address. This is a priority. And it has to be, of course, placed on the top of the priority list. I've spoken to a lot of people and remembering that once upon a time in my lifetime, we got online to get 2 gallons of gas because, in fact, we were not energy independent. And we decided we were going to be a country that became energy independent. Now, without getting into the politics of how you create energy independence, we actually did that to a great extent. I think if we're serious about public health, and that's a big question, and if it doesn't get moved out of the way because of some more glamorous priority, then we too will build the kind of infrastructure with the new technology around public health that will help us through things like this. But we tend to have short memories, let's face it. And so if we're not able to advocate this appropriately and make it stick, I'm afraid this isn't the last of the crisis. So let's all advocate and let's make it a priority and insist that elected officials address it.
I think that's absolutely right. I agree with both of you 100%. Let's ask one more question, Aisha, and then we'll close.
Great, sounds good. This comes from Stephen Shallett from New Jersey Spotlight. What can be done to reassure people and limit their coronavirus exposure in facilities where COVID-19 patients are also being treated?
Yeah, I think that is among the topics of the moment, as I've said. I think honest and transparent communication with prospective patients and the public at large, sharing, first of all, the notion and the facts that many non-COVID patients have already been treated and continue to be treated in facilities where we have disproportionately seen COVID patients. Those patients have been treated and have been discharged effectively. And so I think there are a series of guidelines. We have a multi-page checklist that we have adopted to ensure that our facilities are safe and effective in treating non-COVID patients. I think discussing that with your clinician, your admitting physician, is important so that you understand it. No one should come in and be worried. I think there's appropriate skepticism to ensure that you get the answers, but we have taken the necessary steps, we believe, within the guidelines produced by scientists, public health officials, and healthcare management experts to ensure that we do create a safe environment for non-COVID patients. And we'll continue to do that. By the way, among the plans that we have is for a second wave. How can we at that point ensure people, while this second surge is happening, that there is sufficient resource, space, and personnel to treat non-COVID patients? So some of this is a work in progress, but I think it's a crucial question, and I really can't emphasize enough. I hope members of the public who need care will ask those questions specifically so they can get the care they want.
Yeah, that's really excellent direction. So we're at the end of our time. I think we may all agree that what we're processing right now is some awful combination of, what happened in 1918 and what happened in 1932. So the public health crisis, the economic crisis, there's so much for us to understand, learn about, and in success act on successfully as time goes by. So, to have Barry leading RWJBarnabas, to have Carmen in such a position of significance at Merck gives me great confidence that that we're absolutely on the right track. So thank you both very, very much for joining us.
Thank you too, John.
Thanks, John.